Now, could the French island of Corsica become partly autonomous? It has been part of France since 1768, but still has an influential nationalist movement. And today, President Emmanuel Macron proposed granting limited autonomy to Corsica.
Let's dare to build Corsican autonomy within the Republic. This autonomy must be the way to build a future together without the withdrawal of the central government. It won't be an autonomy at the cost of the state, nor an autonomy without the state. Instead, it will be an autonomy for Corsica and within the Republic.
Mais une autonomie pour la Corse et dans la République.
So what should we make of the President's words there? To discuss, I'm joined now on the line by Professor John Loughlin. Very good to have you on the programme today, sir. This is the first time a French president has talked openly about the idea of Corsican autonomy. I wonder how significant you think that kind of language is.
I think it's extremely significant. As you say, it's the very first time this word has been used. Traditionally in France, the word autonomy has been a taboo term and a taboo topic because of the collaboration during the Second World War of some autonomists. And it has been seen to be breaking up the unity and indivisibility of the French Republic. And I think in recent years, this attitude has changed. And I think now the leaders like Macron and others at the center are more willing to adopt a much more flexible attitude towards autonomy. And the fact that he actually used this word in his speech, I think, is a very significant break in that older tradition. I think we have to remember, too, that in the French political tradition, there's also something called Girondisme, which operates side by side with Jacobinism, which is what has been the tradition in recent years. But this is really returning to an older tradition in which the provinces have some kind of autonomy, but within the context of the unity of the state. And I think that's probably an equally important aspect of Macron's speech. He said it's not simply any autonomy, but it's autonomy within the Republic. And it's not against the state, but it's with the state. And I think that is really quite a big breakthrough.
And in practical terms, do we know at this stage what that partial autonomy for Corsica may look like?
Well, I think what he seems to be proposing, and again, I think here the Corsican political leaders and the people in the French state have 6 months to work out a practical program, which could then be voted on either by the National Assembly and or a referendum in Corsica. That remains to be seen. But he did make some suggestions, and I think the big issue is that the Corsican Assembly could possibly have some legislative powers. He doesn't actually use the word legislation. He talks about the Assembly can create its own norms, but within the context of the powers that have been devolved through the decentralization process. And I think that is something that I think the Conseil d'État actually put down in recent attempts to reform the situation. So I think what it will mean is there will be a reform of the Constitution in which Corsica will have an article by itself, will have a special place, and its insularity, its linguistic and cultural specificity will be recognized by the Constitution, and on that basis then Corsica would be recognized as a distinctive community within the Republic, as it's still within that context. And therefore the Assembly could have a legitimate role in carrying out and proposing legislation that affects the affairs of the island. And again, that's again, it was a taboo subject. There can be no autonomy outside the national state. And this is really a breakthrough. But what it will mean in practice has to be worked out.
Indeed. As you say, though, this president has gone further than any others in the past on the issue. So I wonder whether you think this is a victory then for the Corsican nationalists. Are they likely to be satisfied with what Emmanuel Macron said today?
Well, from what I gather from some of the reactions, I think the majority of the nationalists and autonomy, you have to distinguish between the nationalists, who are independentistes, who are the separatists, and then those who advocate for autonomy within the Republic, who have always been around. Now, in the Corsican Assembly at present, a coalition of those groups form the majority within the Assembly. But within that coalition, I think there are some more radical voices who seem to be not very happy with Macron's statement. I think the majority of the people in the Nationalist Autonomous Coalition are actually quite willing to work with this, and they're showing a much more pragmatic attitude. And we'll have to wait and see how which one carries the day. But my own feeling, it would be actually that majority of pragmatists, if you want to call them that, who will actually see it through.
Well, let me ask you one final question, if I can, and briefly, if possible. I'm interested in whether you think this might set off a sort of chain reaction in other parts of France that do have their own strong regional identities. I'm thinking of Brittany, for example.
Yeah, I think it possibly could. And if we look at the Spanish example, where we have, autonomous communities, there's 17 autonomous communities, 5 had special powers, and the dynamic created under the Spanish Constitution was that the regions with ordinary powers wanted to catch up on the regions with special powers, and this seems to be a possibility within France as well. I could well imagine Corsicans and other parts of France with a strong identity would want similar powers. And also the other ordinary regions, if you like, who don't have a particularly strong identity as such, might envy the Corsicans' powers to have these legislative powers, for example. So it's quite possible that this could spark off a kind of a race among the regions to see how they could catch up with Corsica. But again, that is in the future. And we first of all have to see what comes out of this 6 months of negotiations that are coming up.
Really interesting, sir. I appreciate your time very much. Professor John Loughlin talking to us there. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.